Well, we've had Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and Easter. We've looked at the death and resurrection of Jesus. And while those are extremely important, it's not that Jesus just died and rose from the grave. Jesus also was a teacher. And so the teachings of Jesus are also important. Many of them, though, seem unreasonable. And I think the ones we heard from our gospel reading today probably make us uncomfortable. One of the ones we heard was, "To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also." This is the familiar saying, "Turn the other cheek." And Jesus did say that. It's very plain. But it's really hard. So what are we to do? Now the passage we heard is the one from Luke. The Gospel of Matthew reports basically the same thing in a different setting. It's a little different. Matthew's version goes, "You have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him also." And that's a hard thing to do. The problem with it is if you take it literally, it would seem that you're prohibited from ever defending yourself. You go through life letting everybody just walk all over you, becoming a punching bag for whatever people want to do. But other than that, if we live by that, the whole basis of law and order in society would break down. If we turned the other cheek against criminals and didn't resist them, they'd take us over. If we as a nation turned the other cheek, if we didn't resist people who would like to take us over and destroy us, the whole country would be ruined. So what do we do with turn the other cheek? Now a lot of people have said, surely Jesus did not mean for us to take this literally. He didn't really mean that. There must be some reasonable interpretation of this. And in the history of Christianity, there have been a number of interpretations offered for it. I thought today it would be interesting to look at some of them, some of the more popular ones. Now, a lot of the ones depend on the Gospel of Matthew, because Matthew specifically says right cheek, while Luke does not. So many interpreters will use this right cheek and go off on that. But I want to talk about those first. One of the most popular is that Jesus is saying, not telling you not to resist someone trying to hit you to harm you, but it is talking about being hit just as an insult. And the idea is that if someone were really trying to harm you, they would hit you with their fist. And if somebody's standing in front of you and they hit you with their fist, they're probably going to hit you on the left side, because most people are right-handed and they use their right fist to hit you with. Now, since apparently this person got hit on the left side, the idea is, well, they weren't trying to hit you, they were backhanding you. Because if you're standing in front of somebody and you hit them on the right cheek, you backhand them. So it's not really a slap to hurt you. The whole thing then hinges on said that people back then, if they wanted to insult somebody, they backhanded them. So this whole thing about Jesus telling us to turn the other cheek, it's not that somebody's trying to hurt us, it's just that they're trying to insult us. And Jesus is saying, don't respond to insults. Another variation on this insult thing uses the same reasoning, that they're hitting you on the right cheek with their backhand. Okay, now supposedly somebody came up with the idea that if a social equal of yours slaps you on the face, they will do it with the palm of their hand. But if somebody slaps you with their backhand, that means they do not consider you their social equal. So if you turn your left cheek toward them, the only way they can hit that is with their palm, And they're not going to do that because they don't want to recognize you as their social equal. A variation on that has to do with Roman soldiers. Somebody came up with the idea that Roman soldiers strutted around the country slapping Jews in the face with their backhands to show they were morally, culturally superior. And so turning your left cheek to them would force them to hit you with their palm, which they would not do because that would make it seem like you were their equal. Another variation on the insult thing is that instead of being hit on the right cheek as an insult, some people say that was trying to provoke a confrontation, to pick a fight. So when they hit you, they're not really trying to hurt you at that moment. They're just trying to start an argument, or start a fuss, or start a fight. And so Jesus is saying, back down when somebody's trying to start something with you. Don't let somebody goad you in to fight. Now, yet another variation on this is that Jesus is not telling us not to defend ourselves. He's just saying, don't take revenge. Now, those are some of the variations on the insult thing. Now, moving on to other interpretations that have been offered, some people say that what Jesus is saying here refers only to the personal realm and not the public realm. They say Jesus is telling us to leave matters of law and order to the government. If someone hits you, don't hit them back. Don't start a big row with them. Go to the authorities. File a police report, take out a warrant form or something, and let the government take care of it through the judicial system. Now, another interpretation that's been offered for this is that Jesus was using hyperbole to illustrate a point. If you use hyperbole, it's like using extreme example to get a point across, but you're not supposed to take the extreme example literally. Now, those who favor this interpretation say that back in the time of Jesus, there was a lot of overreaction on the part of people. Like somebody come up and hit you and you kill them. Or somebody come up and hit you and you go kill their family or something. So what Jesus was trying to do was to get people to quit over-responding. Just don't overreact. That's what he was trying to do here. Another interpretation is that if you turn the other cheek to somebody, that's supposed to shame them. You come up and you hit them, they turn the other cheek, and you really feel bad. Because it illustrates their goodness. It makes you aware of how mean you were. Now, another interpretation is more esoteric. According to this interpretation, the right cheek represents the spiritual things, and the left cheek represents the physical things. And Jesus was saying, okay, let them go ahead and hit you on the left cheek. In other words, let them take physical things away from you, because physical things don't matter. And give them the right cheek because, really, no matter what they do, they can't take away the spiritual things from you. So this puts a more spiritual interpretation on it. Now there's another interpretation that's been offered over the years. This one has been popular. It has to do with what's called nonviolent resistance. The idea is that Jesus is advocating nonviolent resistance. The reasoning goes like, Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Now somebody comes up and hits you. Well, Jesus is not telling you not to do anything. He's telling you to resist by turning your other cheek. So that's resistance, but it's nonviolent. You are in some way resisting them by turning your other cheek. Now that interpretation was popularized back in the civil rights movement in the 1960s and has been used by people since then. That was the rationale behind having synonyms, where people used to have those. And this is sometimes called peaceful subversion. Jesus is calling us, in other words, to change the world through peaceful subversion. And if we do this, it's supposed to activate other people's consciousness of injustice. Their consciences will bother them because of their injustice, and they will change. Yet another interpretation of turn the other cheek is that Jesus is just telling us to be patient. The idea is that Christians need to be trying to change the world. That's going to take a while to do it, and along the way we're going to have to endure injury and insult. We'll be patient. In other words, Jesus is saying, don't get upset over the bumps in the road. Another interpretation is that Jesus is telling us that violence is a cycle. You come up and hit me and I hit you. Then you hit me again because I hit you again. Then I hit you again because you hit me again. And it gets this vicious cycle going. Somebody's got to stop it. And Jesus says, you be the one to stop the vicious cycle of violence. Another possible interpretation is similar to some of the ones we've looked at. In this case, suppose someone comes up to you and hits you. Maybe it's an insult, or maybe they're trying to pick a fight with you. Either way, they expect you to do two things. They expect you to either stand up and fight them, or they expect you to run away. If you do either one of those, they win because they've done one of the things you expect. But suppose you don't do either one of those. Suppose you just stand there and turn the other cheek. Then you've taken their victory away. That person has failed to provoke you. They've also failed to scare you. And then when they reason that they have failed to do that, they realize how cruel they've been. And finally, the last one I'd like for us to look at is the interpretation that says Jesus is not talking about how we live in the world as it is. He's talking about how we could live in a perfect world. In other words, you can't get by with turn the other cheek in this world because of the way things are in the world, but in a perfect world, you could get by with turn the other cheek. Of course, my question to that would be, in a perfect world, why would somebody come up and hit you in the first place? So, we've looked at 14 different interpretations that have been offered for what Jesus said when he said, turn the other cheek. These are not all the ones that's out there. There are many others. Now, my guess is, as I went through these, each one of them sounded reasonable. I mean, really. The one that sounds the most unreasonable to me is the one with the stuff on the right representing the spiritual and the stuff on the left representing the physical. That sounds a little out there to me. But every one of them could be true. They're reasonable. Now imagine that you had not come to church today, and you had gone somewhere tomorrow, and you ran into somebody, and they said, oh, I figured out what Jesus meant when he said, turn the other cheek. And they say, I heard this sermon yesterday, and the preacher, he had done all this research, and says that what Jesus meant on there is that he wants us to stop the cycle of violence. And you listen to that and you think, well, that's reasonable. Somebody does need to stand up and stop the cycle of violence, or else it just continues. So that's reasonable that that's what that means. And so you think, well, I'm glad I finally figured out what Jesus meant when he said turn the other cheek. A couple of weeks later, talking with somebody else. And they said, I got this new book, and I've been reading it every day. And I figured out what it means to turn the other cheek. And he says, it's about the Roman soldiers. Somebody's done a lot of research, and they figured out that these Roman soldiers used to go march around through everywhere, backhanding everybody, just to make them seem like that they were socially inferior. And that's what Jesus was criticizing on that. You think, that sounds reasonable. I'm glad somebody did all that research. They must have had video cameras hanging around 2,000 years ago so they could see that or something. I don't know how they knew that. But so you're impressed with somebody doing that, and you think, that's really good. But then you think, wait a minute. 2 weeks ago, somebody told me that Jesus was trying to get us to stop the cycle of violence. So which one is it? Which one is right? You could repeat this over and over again. Every one of the explanations we looked at is reasonable, but which one is right? Of the 14 we looked at today, which one is right? There's no way to know. This side of heaven, we will never know what Jesus meant when he said, turn the other cheek. It's entirely possible he could have meant exactly what he said. He said, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other to them. It's possible he could have meant exactly what he said. It's also possible that he could have meant any one of the 14 interpretations we looked at today. It's also possible that he meant something else entirely that we haven't come up with yet. The point is that we can never know with certainty what Jesus meant when he said to turn the other cheek. You can read all these different interpretations, and they sound really good. Each one of them does. But how do you know which one's right? One of the hardest things about Christianity in the Bible is that sometimes we have to accept that we cannot understand everything and will not understand it. There are actually a lot of things like that in the Bible. And I've learned over the years that it is far better to admit we don't know than to choose an interpretation and then act like it is the correct one. We don't want to be false prophets after, But yet there's something inside us that wants all questions answered. We want to understand everything. But when we get to something we can't understand, sometimes it's easier to fool ourselves in believing we do understand it than admit we have to leave it as an open question. But leaving it as an open question is better than becoming a false prophet and promoting an interpretation that would turn out to be false. Now, I really don't know what to do with turn the other cheek. It's something I think about a lot. And it's something that it sometimes bothers me. One of the things that bothers me most about this is that all the possible interpretations we looked at today have one thing in common. They all start from the same presumption. And that presumption is that Jesus did not mean what he said, but he meant something else. Isn't that where they all start? With the assumption that Jesus said, turn the other cheek, but that's not what he meant. Then that's what bothers me. You see, that bothers me not only with this passage, but with so many other passages. When we see a teaching of Jesus that is opposite of the way we're used to living, we tend to think he didn't mean it. He must have meant something else. And so we think, okay, now what did he mean when he said that? Well, maybe he meant what he said. What if he did it mean? Turn the other cheek. Do not resist an evil person. What if there is no hidden meaning behind that? What if he meant exactly what he said? How could we live in the world and survive following that? I don't know. But it bothers me. And for a lot of these teachings of Jesus, it's something that I always keep in the back of my mind. What if he really did mean exactly what he said? And that's the main reason I can't take one of the possible explanations we looked at today and stand up here and say, this is what I think it means. It's tempting to do that. But there's also a little voice in the back of my head that says, how do you know? What if he meant exactly what he said? You know, how can we live in a world and survive following the teachings of Jesus? It's hard to imagine any way we could, but yet Jesus taught these things. And like I said, I've seen so many instances where when people agree with something Jesus flat out said, they take it literally. When they do not agree with something Jesus flat out said, they convince themselves there must be some hidden meaning to it, that he did not mean what he said. You know, that is an extremely inconsistent way of looking at the teachings of Jesus. And it's harmful not only to us, but you know the biggest danger in it? It ruins our Christian witness to the world. Because you better believe that there are people out there right now, I know some of them, who do not understand why Christians can go through a page of the teachings of Jesus and pick out the ones they like and say, you see what Jesus said? He said it right here, black and white, it's plain as day. But something else they don't like, they interpret that away and try to find a hidden meaning to it. That right there ruins our Christian witness to the world. It makes us look like a bunch of hypocrites. That's what really bothers me about assuming that Jesus didn't mean what he said. I don't know how we could live if he meant exactly what he said. However, I'm not willing to stand up here and say he meant something different.